what episode of I'm not actually a gas station attendant are we at now, Ian? What, like, I don't know, 10? 9?
Yeah.
Something. Well, welcome back to I'm Not Actually a Gas Station Attendant. We're talking with Greg and Ryan from the legendary band Vine today. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Yeah, this is our second take at this because we had lost about half the conversation from a couple of weeks ago, so we're gonna give this another run. I guess just what tell us your musical origin stories, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I'll try to keep this brief this time around, but like a lot of people my age, it all comes back to Evel Knievel, which leads to skateboarding, which leads to there was some ads in the back of Skateboarder and Action Now and Thrasher magazine for like Black Flag and the Adolescents and bands like that. So then I started going to shows in Detroit. Was lucky enough to be a part of that, the Freezer and the Clubhouse days. So yeah, that's kind of my origin.
For me, skateboarding is pretty much the gateway drug into sort of the Kalamazoo punk scene in the mid 80s. If you skateboarded anywhere in the Portage, Kalamazoo, sort of area, you invariably met people that were involved with bands or going to shows, especially in Kalamazoo. And so I just kind of fell in with a skateboard crowd that led me to some shows at Wood Hall, which was a science building at Western Michigan University, and they did shows there. So I saw some of my first hardcore bands there. And from there, just proceeded to continue seeing bands. I mean, having Kalamazoo be in between Detroit and Chicago at this time, pre-internet, certainly gave us a geographic advantage, I think, to seeing really great live music that was traveling through. And so, it was a great time to be living in a college town with a pretty active participatory scene.
Yeah.
That's interesting because, how did I get from Detroit to Kalamazoo? And when it came time to pick a college, the music scene in Kalamazoo is definitely better than just about any other town in Michigan, including Detroit. Things were just blowing up in Kalamazoo, so it was easy to pick Western as my college.
And that's something that's always like, I don't know what it's like now in terms of the like independent DIY music scene. I know Ian's played a few shows in Kalamazoo over the past decade or so, but like the scene seems shockingly connected to the world at large. Like, and I guess, like Ryan said, that might be something to do with the fact that it was squarely between Detroit and Chicago. But like, I always found it odd because in most smaller cities, it seems like everyone's a little bit behind the times, and it didn't ever seem like that,
in the kind of more rock scene that I was initially involved in, a lot of my friends from Detroit, we all moved up to Kalamazoo. So on a pretty regular basis, our buddies from Ann Arbor and Detroit, like the Big Chief guys and the guys from the Hyenas, and those guys would all come up to hang out on the weekends, whether their band was playing or not. So this sort of bridge developed between, at the time it was mostly Ann Arbor because a lot of those guys were living in Ann Arbor at the time, and Kalamazoo. And they had this kind of, we thought of Detroit and Ann Arbor is kind of really strict. Like, if you showed up to a gig one day and you said that, I like Kiss, but Kiss wasn't cool that week, you'd be in big trouble. But they affectionately nicknamed Kalamazoo the land of no rules. So those guys could all come up to Kalamazoo and just go crazy without worrying about getting kicked out of the scene.
That's a really cool tidbit. Yeah, that's how Kalamazoo has always felt, and that's amazing. Yeah.
Well, and I think I've said this before about Kalamazoo, like specifically within the context of hardcore and punk, is that like you can either like get a scene all on like kind of on one similar sound, or you can get everyone kind of on board with the same ethos. And that's kind of, I don't think any bands really sounded alike in Kalamazoo. Like, whereas, going back to the hardcore thing with you, Greg, Detroit kind of had a sound,
Oh, yeah.
And I don't, I mean, Violent Apathy doesn't sound like anything, that came out of Detroit or really even, it sounded closer to a Chicago. They sound closer to a Chicago band, but it's just interesting how that happens. Like, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and back then when like the Murder of Crows was really the big, indie local band at the time, and all the hardcore kids would go see Murder of Crows, and as well as any hardcore shows that happened to come into town. And another little interesting tidbit since you brought up Violent Apathy, like my first week in the dorms, 313 Foxhall, I was listening to Wider, and Richard Bowser was the DJ, and I knew that he was in Violent Apathy, but I didn't know that he was a DJ on Wider, so I called him up, and I think we had met once or twice before then, and I said, hey, I got a 7-inch in my band, can I come down and play it? And it was so crazy because I ran into Wider, and there he was, and sure enough, he played the 7-inch for us, and from that point, I went on to be involved with Students for Progressive Action, which was the, the group that was putting on a lot of like punk shows in East Hall Gym.
Yeah, it's crazy, like interconnected all of that stuff was. Yeah. Well,
I got one. Like,
sure.
Oh, me. So, like, I think I've brought this up with other people before, but I'm going to ask it again. And it's a terrible point to take from, but like in like the American Hardcore documentary and the book, like those guys were like, oh, like after like 86 or whatever. After that, it's just like, who cares? Like it. They just didn't like it anymore, or whatever. Or they saw a shift happen, and I guess on a more like not so negative, whiny level, like did you guys see a shift? Because you saw like some of the
I mean,
and, like
there was, I mean, as far as the Detroit scene goes, there was definitely a shift, and like that fast hardcore a la Minor Threat, I mean, it just has a short lifespan. And then when a lot of the kids from the suburbs, me included, we started emulating those bands, it all kind of started sounding the same. But really the nail in the coffin, and I think a lot of people will agree with this, was when the Skins got real serious and, racism got real bad, and, there was, violence at a lot of the shows, and, I think the Bad Brains end up playing at a gay nightclub called Todd's, and I guess they didn't know that it was a gay club when they booked the show, and they came out and just went off on, they do not support homosexuality and this and that, and then all the skinheads were there, and there was a huge riot out in front, and at that point it just wasn't fun for me. I was more into, like the fun side of hardcore and skateboarding and stuff like that. I was never really into the oi scene, and neither were many kids, so it was really easy to walk away from that, to be honest. And also at the same time, there was all kinds of new music coming out. That's when the shift to like the Scientists and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Scratch Acid and Killdozer and all those kind of bands started blowing up, and we started getting really interested in those kind of bands.
Yeah. Well, so I know we had talked about this a little bit before, but like, before Vine, there was Firesale, which was essentially, at least at the end, it was Vine, except for a different bassist. How was it that you ended up coming into the fold?
Yeah, so I worked at the skateboard shop in town, and a lot of those guys in that scene, and I'll just call it Joe Wick scene for lack of a better word.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, a lot of those kids were just real young kids when they would come into the skateboard shop with their mom and pick out clothes for the school year and buy new skateboards. So I got to know those kids when they were little.
Yeah.
Timmy Greenman and Josh and Jake Wilson and Yorgo, Shane Pullman. I mean, Ryan Gage from Vine and Tony Miranda. So I got to know a lot of those guys when they were just little kids. And a couple of them, Jake Wilson in particular, as he got older and started going to the same parties as me, he and I just felt like a bond to each other and really liked each other. So we hung out quite a bit. So one time, Jake said, you got to check out my band. I'm playing in this basement. And so that was my first show in that kind of scene, because I was playing in a band called Memories of Tomorrow, and kind of definitely more like a rock scene, hanging out with the guys in Rolling Head. So when I went to that basement show, it really triggered something. I think it kind of brought me back to the Freezer Theater and the Clubhouse days, but I really, really connected with it. And the first couple of bands, I thought were great, but when Firesale played, there was just something really magnetic and special, and I just loved that band so much. And I can't put my finger on it. They just really stood out from the crowd. So, so a few weeks later, Jake said, you should come over and play bass with our band. And I'm not sure if it was a tryout or what. And to be honest, I wasn't a bass player. I was a guitar player at the time. And they said they had some gear for me. And I may have borrowed Alan from the Deconstruction. I think I might have borrowed his bass, or it was Dean from Rolling Head. I borrowed a bass and showed up at practice. And at least from my point of view, it just really felt natural and connected. And I don't know, Jake and I in particular, we just played really well together. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning of me and Vine. And I don't know, Ryan, you might have a different perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, Firesale was kind of, I wasn't originally in Firesale, and as noted the last time we spoke, they went on a little tour out to Washington, D.C., and at that point, Chuck, the guitarist, approached me and said, hey, when we get back to Kalamazoo, we'd like to have you sing in the band and have Joel just be the bass player, because he was the singer at the time. And I'm not really sure what it was about me per se. I mean, I was pretty good friends with Chuck, but I think they were just looking to have more of a front man who wasn't connected to an instrument, kind of a look. And, I had previous experience in another band. So I said, yeah, I wasn't doing anything. And I loved the music they were playing. The first time I saw Firesale, like Greg, they blew me away, because nothing in Kalamazoo was really doing what Chuck Wood was writing. It was very DC Discord Records influenced, and at the time in Kalamazoo, there wasn't really any bands. It was like double time hardcore, punk rock or rock and roll or reggae or whatever it was, but there wasn't really anything that had a kind of DC sound in Kalamazoo at the time. And so Chuck just blew me away with how fantastic he was at guitar, and he had a really great stage presence. And Tony and Jake and Joel, they held everything together. They were just really great as well. So I jumped at the opportunity, and from there we played a few gigs in Kalamazoo. And then by the summer of '91, I think got approached to play. Joel was booking the Fugazi Nation of Ulysses show at the State Theater, and he wanted us to open for them. But unfortunately, the band kind of imploded. at that time because of some, I'll just say it was interband dynamics. And basically, Tony and Chuck and I kind of felt a little disappointed because we still wanted to be in a band and still wanted to play. And so knowing that drummers are always a scarcity in most towns, we didn't want to burn any bridges with Jake. So we basically kind of quietly, approached him and said, hey, we'd still like to play music, but we're going to probably need to get a new bass player. And I'm not sure. I think Jake was more the connection between Greg and the band, but we were all living at this house on Sprague Street, practicing in the basement, and Greg comes down, with his 22-ounce can of beer.
That was
after that, we all had a great chemistry.
That was a 40-ounce beer.
You were off by 18.
I know. Yeah, I can't really remember exactly. I remember walking down the stairs. I remember seeing these guys. I don't remember the specifics other than it just clicked. Something just happened that first practice, and especially because I wasn't really a bass player, but all of a sudden I felt like I was like the best bass player in the world. Like everything just happened naturally. I knew exactly where to go on the neck. Like I don't read music and I don't know the notes I'm playing, but everything just fell right into place for me, and it just felt perfect.
You guys were always extremely tight live, so obviously it was a very good fit, yeah. Well, Ryan, I kind of have this is just a question out of curiosity. I know you were kind of, and we kind of touched on this when we last talked, like you were kind of a Revelation Records straight edge kid, and then you kind of moved more towards the Discords thing. What do you think there was a point where you were just like, I'd rather listen to Soulside than Bold?
Yeah, my senior year in high school, my musical tastes were shifting towards more sort of mid-tempo, kind of slower stuff. I got really into the Descendants my senior year in high school, and all played at Club Soda, and they played half their set. They played Descendants songs, and even though it wasn't Milo, it still was amazing. So yeah, I was already kind of shifting towards just more melodic, tuneful, songwriting. Last Laugh didn't do much for me. I wasn't a very good singer, and they got better definitely after I left with Marty as the singer. I think Derek got better at guitar, and so I was definitely listening to different music by that point.
And, one thing that really surprised me, because, after I got in the band, I started hanging out with those guys all the time, and eventually I moved into the Sprague house. And one of the things that surprised me musically at the time was how often the Smiths were being played in that house. I couldn't make that connection at first, but once Vine started to evolve, the Smiths' influence became pretty obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, I could definitely hear that, especially someone from a lyrical standpoint. So, I guess the first time I saw you guys was an all-ages matinee at Club Soda. I want to say Twitch and the Deconstruction played it, and I don't know, maybe Spork played it, but what was your first show?
We played in our basement.
Okay.
And we were actually, our first name was Revolver,
which
we later changed shortly thereafter. I want to say that it was Knee Deep Shag, maybe, and somebody else. But
yeah, I think you're right. It was a kind of a weird lineup. And I think maybe there was a show booked in our basement and we decided to tag onto it or something. We weren't even quite ready, if I recall.
Yeah, I wasn't living in the house, I don't think, at that time. I may have been still at the dorms. And there was a guy that lived there. His name was Eric, and he was a big environmentalist and a big hippie. And it's very possible that he was the reason why Knee Deep Shag played. But But I mean, Kalamazoo, everybody knew everyone, even in terms of like the bands playing with each other. There was a lot of crossover in terms of genres.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in our basement.
I'm guessing that demo recorded shortly after that, or
Yeah,
probably. Yeah.
yeah, we recorded that at Nazareth, right, Ryan?
Yep, Nazareth with Dano.
With Dano Humiston. He had bought some recording gear, and I think we were one of the first bands he recorded. That was one of 3 recordings, right? We did that one. We did the other one with Todd.
Yeah.
And then we did the one in Washington, D.C., right?
Yep.
With Jeff Turner.
Yep.
oh, which was like piano at the WGNS sessions, or
It was piano, Cocoon, and Jewish Numbers we did with Todd Carter up at Western. And then the 7-inch was done in DC.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And
Yeah, I think Mike Harbin, the guy who put the record out, he was the bassist in Admiral, a band that we, at least Chuck and I, pretty much worshipped for a little while. We got the chance to see them live a couple times, and they were absolutely riveting live. And so I think he was connected with. He was living in Rockville, Maryland, I think at the time, just outside of DC, and knew Jeff Turner from 3.
Well, and he was playing bass in Trusty at that point too, wasn't he?
It's quite possible. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely. I think somewhere out there's a Trusty Vine cassette, like a split cassette.
Huh.
And I think I saw it on Discogs. But yeah, Mike was really instrumental. Not only did he put out the 7-inch, but he helped book that entire East Coast tour. Got the 7-inch with Jeff Turner, which was pretty amazing because at least for me at that time, I totally worshiped Circus Lupus. So to be in that studio with him was just amazing. And then, the bands we got to play with were incredible too. The standout for me was Lincoln. Junction was amazing, and we were playing we were lucky enough to play the key venues in these key towns too. Hoover, hanging out with Hoover and staying at their house was pretty amazing.
Where'd you guys play at in DC, or did you play DC, or?
We played in Georgetown at a coffee shop, and I just remember that I was very excited and very nervous to play it because there were a lot of people that were in some prominent DC bands that were in attendance, and I felt like I'd come full circle in my love of DC bands. So
that was kind of a weird gig, though, right? If I recall, it was like a Sunday afternoon, and it was in the front windows of a coffee shop. So you were people walking down the sidewalk, they would see the backs of us.
Yeah.
And it was daylight. It was bright lights. But yeah, the people in the audience, I remember Alec and Amanda McKay, and I think Ryan, you probably remember a couple other people, but I was definitely starstruck, and it was crazy.
I'd just like to point out that I looked up on Discogs that it was the Trusty Vine and HGUAL promotional cassette from Sidekick Records, and it's got your 7-inch on it. So.
Oh.
Huh.
There you go.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know that until just a few weeks ago.
So he did a really good job at promoting it, is what you're saying.
Right? Exactly.
Any sort of tour hijinks stories you want to?
Greg, you got to talk about we did 2 tours, but we got to talk about the vans.
Did we do 2 tours? I thought we did 1. Okay,
the first one we did, we had a van that you had to put we had a 2x4 because the parking brake didn't work.
Right.
So you guys had to go run outside and put that in front of the tire, but it had some weird thing in the middle next to the steering wheel, I remember, it had like a straw sticking out of it or something, and I'm not really sure why, but it was.
I think you had to take the cover off the motor and then put something in the carburetor to get the float or the I don't know, something was stuck often.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think we actually toured in that. I thought that van broke. And I was working at Gazelle Sports at the time, and I somehow managed to talk my boss into letting us use the Gazelle Sports van. So
I thought that you were going to do like a rollerblading. I feel like rollerblading had some element to your ruse.
I think I was truthful and said that we wanted to borrow the van to go on tour. I think I agreed to pay them, which I'm not sure if we ever paid them though. So that's kind of the downside. And there's some pictures of us. I think we stayed in Hamtramck on the way out of town with some friends of mine, and there's a few pictures I have with the whole band, like, pretty typical band shot up against the van, and the van is the Gazelle Sports van.
We stayed at the Tony Joy Berman Scum House.
That was
we played with Born Against one night.
Mm-hmm.
That house was
intense.
Crazy. Greg and I slept in the van.
So the basement was probably the worst basement I've ever seen in my entire life. It was kind of like a crawl space, but it actually got worse from there because the house was just kind of a crash pad for a lot of different people, most of which I think were vegan, because the kitchen was filled with like these mason jars filled with mold samples that they would somehow like make bread from these mold samples or something. But the biggest thing that stands out the most was do you remember this, Ryan? The sleeping bodies room?
Yeah, there were like mattresses in all these rooms with all these like crust punks. And they said that there were rats. I remember that part of it. They were like, yeah, you might see a rat or something. And I think that's the one thing I remember that certainly propelled me to sleep in the van that night. Yeah,
I think, the sleeping bodies, it was just like rooms that were wall-to-wall mattresses. And during the day, it seemed dirty and gross, but there was nobody there. And then sometime around 9:30 or 10, like people started creeping in and just finding their space on the floor. And Ryan's right. I think that Jake and I saw a rat.
Ugh.
And then, I ended up sleeping in the very back of the van. But yeah, that place was intense. But I mean, Tony Joy.
Yeah, we woke up the next morning, and I remember Tony was like in his garden picking tomatoes. It was just the most punk rock scene, just
God.
That was amazing. I think playing that Baltimore with Hoover, that show was really fun. That was I think the first time, and this happened like 3 times, I think, in my Vine career, that I just completely, like on stage, completely forgot a song.
Yeah, I remember it was Defending Uniforms.
Yeah, like I literally,
I can't play it.
I literally couldn't remember how to play it. And Chuck was over there trying to show me the bass line, and I'm like, can't do it. And we just had to skip over it. It was this crazy, just brain aneurysm that kicked in at the wrong moment.
It happens. And
then I also really liked, and Ryan, you can help me out with this one, the show we played in State College.
Yeah.
Did Junction play that show, or was that just Lincoln?
I think it was. It was the guy from Kerosene 454, the drummer of that band. Mm-hmm. They were like they sounded a lot like the Melvins. And their band started with a D.
Oh, are you talking about the Lincoln Side Project? It was something Fan, I want to say.
Boy, I don't know. I think it was just Junction that we played with this other band. And there was a guy that had a funny name, and I cannot remember, but we made fun of. Oh gosh, yeah. Sorry, I gotta I just remember that one of the bands we played with, the drummer was this amazing virtuoso drummer who later was the drummer of Kerosene 454, who played, you may have seen them when they played at 31G. But he's the only drummer that I've ever watched where I just didn't care about what the band was playing. I just watched him because he was so ridiculously good.
Yeah, they seem to play Kalamazoo a lot. Kerosene 450.
Yeah.
They were always really, really good, yeah.
Yeah, we played Morgantown, West Virginia as well, and that was a really good show.
Yeah, we definitely connected with that band Junction. Like, we became, really good friends with those guys and played lots of shows with those guys. And I think that sort of helped form this, like, connection. And Joel, and he certainly did a lot of work to make this happen too, but there was kind of this, like, DC Kalamazoo connection that started to form, and a lot of those bands would, not only play in Kalamazoo, but they ended up staying for a few days. The guys from Lungfish stayed with us. Tori, you guys know that guy Tori?
Yeah.
Acoustic guitar. He stayed for like a whole summer.
And then he moved there for a while too.
Yeah, I think he lived with us for a few months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he lived at like some place. Like Dan Bittner and I once went to dinner at his house. It was some house on, like, it was that brick road that Davis Street empties out onto. That's that huge hill. He lived in some, like, apartment there with his wife.
Gotcha.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a cool connection between what was going on around D.C. and what was happening in Kalamazoo. And then, before we switch gears here, Rich, you and I were talking before about what's the crazy mansion in New Jersey? Yeah. So I was telling Rich this story last time before we actually started recording about, Ryan, do you remember playing that show?
Yeah, it was John Hiltz's house.
Oh, it was John Hiltz's. Okay, it wasn't the Tom's River house then. Probably.
So
it was a basement in a really fancy, posh neighborhood, and we played with Native Nod and Gray House, I think it was.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it was John Hiltz's basement.
And the one thing I remember about that show, and I don't know, you might remember it differently, but I remember just like going crazy because, it was the last show of the tour, and we were ready to get home, and we were super tight by that point because we just played like 10 shows in a row. So we're just going at it 100%, and then we finish a song, and it's like people like this very polite little claps, like you're at an opera or something. And I really thought by the end of the show that everybody hated us. And when it came time to sell our merch, we sold out of everything. Like anything we had left, those guys bought it all up. So that was just a really crazy scene.
I think, like, either by time, like, we went and played D.C. and we also played in New Jersey and Tom's River, like, the thing that freaked us out at that time was, like, Kalamazoo is very much, no moshing, scene. But, like, this is the first time I'd ever seen where kids would literally just, like, sit crisscross applesauce on the floor. Like, it was really weird because it felt like, man, they don't even want to put the energy in to stand up to watch us.
Right.
This is
it was
weird.
nuts.
How do you like that kick drum? Because it's right there.
Right.
Yeah, we could have just gotten someone to sit in front of your kick drum so it wouldn't move. Yeah.
Well, then we decided after that gig we were going to make the drive back to Kalamazoo. We were going to load up and drive. And about an hour and a half or two onto the drive home, it started snowing. It was a horrible blizzard.
Oh.
So we pulled off, and we were at an all-night diner and ran into this band. And maybe you guys know this band now because I think that they actually ended up putting out some records, but they were called Broken Bones.
The UK band?
Possibly.
There was
But they were just another band that happened to be on the road at the same time, and just were on tour, and I think we just had a cup of coffee with those guys and continued on our way.
Yeah, those. Were you like in Pennsylvania by the time the snow hit, like in the those foothills. Yeah, those are. I've made that trip from western Michigan to DC and got stuck in a blizzard in those foothills. It's no fun, that's for sure.
It was brutal, and I remember just about everybody was sleeping, and I was driving, and I was really tired, and I just wanted a little bit of peace and quiet. And I remember Jake comes up to the passenger seat, and he's like, "Don't worry, Greggy, I'll keep you awake. I'll talk to you all night." And I was just like, "No, I love you, Jake, but can we just be quiet?"
Well, and so you did. What was that your first tour, or because you said you did 2 tours?
I think that was the first tour. Yeah, I think they were both around spring break, so they were March tours.
Okay.
Sometime mid-March or whatever, whenever Western's spring break was.
Are you sure Are you sure you're not blending the Firesale tour?
No. We went twice.
Okay.
Yeah, there was one time where we got out and we were out in the middle of Western Pennsylvania, and there was just nothing but farmland, and we got out and played frisbee in this giant field, and which I still have photos of, I think somewhere around here. But yeah, it was 2 tours, and I remember, it was the 2 bands are very emblazoned on my mind.
Gotcha. Well, I guess I'm blending them into one then.
Yeah, I mean, we played in a lot of the same cities, both tours. So.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, you guys were going to put out a 7 on Withering Records, after the one on Sidekick, weren't you?
I don't even know what Withering Records is.
Yeah, I don't.
The label that put out Grey House, that first Grey House 7-inch.
When you mention Grey House, it sounds vaguely familiar. There might have been some.
For some reason, I thought, and my memory's pretty good, but I definitely mixed things up, in my late 40s. But yeah.
No, I don't. To be honest, I don't think there was much talk of doing any more records after that 7-inch came out. I think by the time we came back from that, what turns out to be our second tour. I don't think we played any shows or practiced for 3 months. Right, Ryan?
Yeah, there was lots of frisbee golf that summer.
Yeah. And I think we may even did some rollerblading, so maybe that's where that's coming in.
Yeah. No, yeah. We were living at a Sprague house and that whole summer, and things, we weren't very active, and I think we were just kind of taking a break, but that break basically kind of just sort of transitioned into not being in a band until our last show in August. So I think we knew that it was the last show. I think we actually just kind of got back together basically to play it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that, my buddies in Big Chief were headlining that show, and my other buddies in Love Offering were also playing, so they were all my best buddies, and it made a lot of sense from that point of view for us to play that gig too. It just would have been really fun, and I don't think we actually said that we're broken up, but I remember we just practiced a handful of times before that gig, and the crazy thing about that gig was that people were freaking out. I remember people, my friends asking me where did you learn about that kind of music? They just had never seen anything like it before. And, people saying about how amazing we are and how tight we were. And, so I think half the band was thinking, let's keep this going. Of course, it was super flattering to hear all that. And the other half of the band was kind of already moved on, I think.
It's even possible that Joel Wick accidentally put us on the flyer and then we had to play it or something. That seems
right. Yeah. So how many gigs in total do you think Vine played? Because it wasn't that many. I mean, we probably played 6 or 7 times in Kalamazoo, 2 or 3 times in Detroit, and once in Chicago. I think that's it, right?
I have no memory of playing in Chicago whatsoever, so I'll have to take your word for it. But
Was that the one you were saying was the birthday party?
Yeah, and I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, it was a kid's birthday party, and we got asked to play, and we had no idea we didn't know that it was a birthday party in a kid's house. We just took the gig and went out there, and we were the only band, and it was a suburban kid, and it's, the parents were there, and the kids were pretty young. They were like 14 and 15-year-old hardcore kids. Yeah, it was super awkward. We played and then drove back to Kalamazoo.
Yeah, I think maybe 15 times or so. I mean, we played a few pretty good Monday night gigs. We had a Hyenas show, which we played. We played with a band called Poster Children, who was kind of a big band, I want to say, from Champaign or somewhere. The Big Chief show, I thought we played really good.
I think my favorite gig was we talked about it last time, the one in the upstairs warehouse.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, at the Park Trades building.
Yeah, that one, and didn't Current played.
Current, yeah.
Yeah, for me that was my favorite show. Not only did I think that things really like just solidified and gelled for us, like we really came into our own. But that was the first time that I looked out in the crowd and saw people other than the Joel Wick hardcore kids. All of a sudden, like the crew of Boogie Records were there. Some of the more rock kids, like the Rolling Head crew, was there. So that was the first time that I was like, whoa, I guess people like us beyond like the expected crowd, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I kind of have a Vine story. So Ian and I's first band played our very first show at that at that barn in Otsego. I don't know if you guys remember this. It was with 411, and you guys played as well. And we were trying to tune up before we were playing. And, I mean, between having frazzled nerves, my bass strings were probably really, really old, and we didn't have tuners. And I remember trying to tune and couldn't find the note. And Chuck came in and tried to help me and broke my E string.
Oh, God.
And he offered to let us borrow your bass, but I think I had a spare string that was probably only slightly less dirty than the ones I had on. But
right.
But man, yeah, I always thought at that time, I was like, man, that was so cool that he was trying to help me. But like, yeah, goddamn, that was a horrible show.
When it comes to being in tune, Chuck is an expert. Because being in tune, like close enough was usually good enough for me, right? And it used to drive Chuck crazy. Like, there was definitely times where he would be looking at me like, dude, you're out of tune. Or 1 or 2 times he actually reached across and like, and tuned my bass mid-song,
Oh, wow. I've always been amazed by people who can do that, like, tune their instrument while they're playing. Like, I'm just like, I have too much going on. I can't,
I agree. And, I think, Chuck was certainly a genius, definitely the best guitar player, or one of the best guitar players I've, got to see and play with. He was a natural, and the songs he wrote were just so amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and Ryan had talked about it. I don't, Ian and I never really thought about this, but after we talked, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever it was, we were listening to old Vine recordings and realized there was a lot of metal influence in what he was writing that I would have never thought of that way.
I don't think it was intentional. I don't think we ever sat down and said, hey, let's put a real big chunky metal riff on this. But it was just like a confluence of different influences of what we were all listening to at the time. And sometimes it just kind of came out that way where there was usually a pretty strong melody, I would say, or, to a certain extent in most of our songs. But around those melodies, oftentimes there was some chunky guitaring that I guess we all accepted at the time. I guess we were cool with it. I mean, we were listening to bands like Jesus Lizard and other bands that were kind of angular, and we had kind of moved on from the Firesale was very DC, Fugazi, Soulside influenced, whereas Vine, I'd say that it was a broader palette that we were kind of drawing from.
So you feel like you had to stay in a lane? Did you guys just go like, let's just do whatever? Or was it like...
I think our songs are pretty eclectic, actually. I mean, we got this weird, fast Blue Baby song, or
Baby Blue,
where it's just like this banger right off with like this huge Black Sabbath riff that Tony does, and then there's songs like Cocoon, which are kind of weird and angular and metal, and then a song like Without Feeling Ugly. I think we were all like, that kind of has like a Mas Icon thing going on with it.
100%. Well, in your first power ballad, One Eye, very much, what it reminded me of was Fade to Black by Metallica a little bit.
Wow.
Well, see, we were probably going for a Mas Icon thing, and it ended up being filtered through Chuck, and Chuck just sort of metalized everything. I don't know.
You know what happened for me was when we went out to DC, I kind of felt like, because, playing with these other bands, I kind of felt like Vine was emo by the numbers, right? We were pretty straight emo, and I'm using quotes here. And then we got out there and saw how other bands like Lungfish and Hoover were kind of like building and expanding on that. And I think when we got back to Kalamazoo, we didn't want to be like straight emo anymore, or even like we tried to like build on the early Vine stuff and do something a little more interesting. But it's also crazy because I like that some of the early Vine stuff is my favorite Vine stuff.
I mean, that demo was really, really good for sure. I guess I didn't think of you guys ever as paint by the numbers, because I felt like I don't really know that there were any bands that really like sounded like you guys in my mind, anyways. Like, I mean, I guess there's some similarities to like Soulside, but like, I didn't like. I don't know. Like, I thought you guys were doing a thing that was different than anything anyone else was really doing.
Yeah, maybe it was how we interpreted those early bands like Mas Icon. Like, that's kind of what we were listening to a lot, but by the time it came out through the Vine filter, it sounded a lot different. I think there's a crazy osmosis that happens in scenes, and you guys probably know all about this too. It's like you don't even have to really hear the bands. It's something is just seeping into your DNA, and and everything just kind of ends up sounding similar. And I'm not sure how that happens. Like, I saw a discussion on YouTube once. Somebody posted a Vine song, and somebody said, this sounds like Mas Icon. And they said, no, Mas Icon sounds like Vine. And somebody went and figured out the dates, and apparently we had written a similar song to Mas Icon before they did. So don't quote me on that. We're going to have to go back and confirm it, but...
I'm not going to go with that, but I don't think. And Chuck could play anything. He was so we didn't want to have a sound, and I don't remember too much about our practices other than we took a lot of breaks. There were quote unquote smoke breaks all the time for Jake, and I think you were a smoker then, Greg.
A little bit, but nothing on the level that
Chuck was. Chuck was a big smoker. So.
Yeah, it was Chuck and and Jake primarily with the smoke breaks. I think we'd play 2 songs and take a break.
Right. So, yeah. And, yeah, I don't know. I don't think we really did sound... I mean, there were other bands in town that were... I mean, I think of bands that we played with, and no one... There were just different... I think we had a kind of thing going, and it was not really intentional. It was just a matter of getting these people together in a band and what came out. And I cringe when I listen to my vocals back then. They're really bad. And I've tried to be a much better singer since then, and it's hard for me to listen to that old stuff, quite frankly.
Oh man, I disagree. I mean, the melodies and the quality of your vocals were part of the magic. I mean, that was like the cherry on top for me. And I mentioned this last time, and I'll just mention it briefly this time too. I loved being in Vine, but it was I loved the music that Vine was making too, which isn't always the case when you're in a band. Sometimes you're in a band and you like being in the band, but you don't like the end product, right? Yeah. There was everything about Vine that I liked. I mean, I loved Ryan's singing and the way Jake and I connected in the rhythm section, and Tony and Chuck, and I just really feel privileged to be part of that band at that time and part of the Kalamazoo scene at that time. It was just something special going on.
Hell yeah.
Would you say, Ryan, that, like, I was just thinking about this, would you say that Kevin Seconds was a bit of an influence on what you were doing vocally in Vine? Like,
no, I don't think so. I mean, I definitely was listening to some of the 7 Seconds albums years before Vine, where they were definitely like listening to U2 and kind of doing their whole post-hardcore thing. And no, he was... I don't think there was any one specific vocalist that I kind of liked over others. Although, I mean, Chris Thompson from... There's a Broken Hearts Are Blue song that we recorded a few years ago, and we were in the playback room, just listening to it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just totally did a Chris Thompson there. Like, it just kind of came out. It was like this just little, spunky snarl or something. But I mean, I don't know. I tried to sing in tune, but did not succeed very well. I don't think I don't think I thought about my singing in terms of the way I do now, which is trying to hit notes and trying to be as good a singer as I possibly can, given my limitations. I think my limitations were not anything that I thought about back then. I was like, it's about, it's about the emotion, man. It's, it's about the passion. That's what it's about, not necessarily, hitting those notes and, sounding better. But
well, I remember when we recorded with Todd, that was the first time that we used kind of studio effects on the music, like at the beginning of Jewish Numbers, and we kind of, your voice was slightly affected. I don't know if he used reverb or whatever, but to me that seemed really unusual at the time too. Like, bands in our genre weren't really using studio effects. But even though it was unusual to do that at the time, I think it really, those recordings we did with Todd Carter, I think are amazing. I love the way those came out.
Sound huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ryan's vocals are particularly awesome on those too.
And so I guess we had kind of talked about this before as well, but like, to the best of your knowledge, Todd Carter has those recordings, or?
No. In fact, he may not have them at all. I think he had... Well, he was in Japan for a while, and I don't know, I feel like at some point he lost a lot of his DAT tapes.
Oh.
I think we were, or maybe, I don't know. You'd have to ask Todd as to what has survived. I know that we tried to cobble some Lemmy and Masha stuff that he had saved, and he still had that. So I don't know about Vine.
I think that, after we talked last time, I think that I'm going to make an effort to see if Todd or Jeff Turner have the masters. I think it would just be.
Yeah, I know that Council would love to do a discography for you guys.
Man, something like that would be amazing, but just having the masters would, I don't know, I would just somehow feel better knowing that they were safe.
Yeah.
But doing, releasing something would just be amazing too.
You heard it here first.
I think
very unlikely that there will be a reunion tour. I can say that.
Yeah, that probably won't happen.
Yeah.
So what, I know a little bit of what Ryan did post Vine, but what bands did you do after Vine?
Me, Greg?
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason Vine broke up is I was anxious to get back to Denver. And I really, being in a band, I started playing in bands when I was 15, and it was really just kind of a hobby, and I never really took it seriously. Even in Vine, there was never any aspirations about being a professional musician. So, in fact, I don't even think I owned gear when I was in Vine. I did own a bass for a while, but I think I always had borrowed amps.
You had that bass cabinet that was like 7,000 pounds.
Yeah, but I don't even remember if I owned that or I think I might have borrowed it from Dave Van Dyke from Rolling Head. I'm not sure.
I feel like Terry Carpenter said that he had bought a 218 cab off of you at one point, but
that could be. Yeah, because that's certainly a heavy cabinet. So anyways, when I came to Denver, I really didn't think that I would be playing in bands ever again. But oddly enough, one of the first nights I was staying at one of my buddies' apartment, and he was working that night, so I just walked down to this, kind of a dive bar called the Lion's Lair where a lot of punk bands played. And I met this woman named Michelle, and it was literally the first or second night that I got back to Denver and started chatting with her, and she was considering starting a band. And she auditioned for a band, but she didn't initially get in the band, but they were looking for a bass player, so she suggested I audition. So I auditioned and I got in, and then later we brought her into the band as well. So that band was called Dive initially, and then we found out there was a European Dive, so we switched our band name to Space Team Electra. Heavily influenced, by My Bloody Valentine and Cockatoo Twins and that whole shoegazer scene, but definitely had like a pop vibe to it as well. And I ended up being in that band for like 12 or 13 years, and we did some pretty incredible stuff. I think 3 or 4 records, a couple of 12 inches, a 7-inch. We recorded with Sandy Pearlman, who, he was famous for producing Blue Oyster Cult, and he produced a Clash record. And we also did a record with Keith Cleversley, which, he was famous for doing the Flaming Lips. And the reason we ended up recording with him is because we were just obsessed with that first Hum record. And the way that record was produced, and we wanted to sound huge like that, so we sent him a demo, and sure enough, he agreed to work with us. So yeah, it was great, man. It was a great 12-year run. I really enjoyed it.
That's impressive to make a band last 12 years. That's impressive, yeah. And so with you, Ryan, you did Lockheed Electro, which was just a recording project with Alan and Chuck, right?
Yeah, Chuck and Ron from FAQ.
Yeah, and then was there anything between that and Broken Hearts Are Blue, or?
Lemmy and Masha was Todd Carter, Tony Miranda on guitar, Todd played bass, and Steve Versaw played drums, and we had a young woman from Western who was in the music program whose name I think it's Candace, if I recall. She played violin on one song. think Tony was friends with her and brought her in. We played one show. We recorded a pretty bad sounding demo tape that exists online at whatever SoundCloud or whatever, one of those sites.
That was pre Broken Hearts, or
that was pre Broken Hearts. Yeah.
Was Lemmy and Masha or Lockheed Electra on that Uno demo?
That was Lockheed Electra.
Lockheed.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and that was really just kind of a 2-song project band. I don't think anyone had any intentions of doing anything beyond that. So, but yeah, Lemmy and Masha was great. I think that was the one group that I kind of was like, I kind of want to do something other than just screaming in this band, because it was kind of, Tony was really into the Sea and Cake and Tortoise at the time, and I think Steve was getting into jazz, so it definitely had a more jazzier rock kind of feel to it, and screaming was just not gonna cut it. So.
Sure. Well, and I mean, I don't know how I missed that. It's
short-lived.
Yeah.
I think we played at the Crow's Nest upstairs there.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
And then Broken Hearts Are Blue, I basically got into that in late 95, early 96.
And now you have a double LP coming out.
And now we have a double LP after 26 years. It was a long gestation period, long sophomore effort.
Yeah.
But,
that's crazy.
Yeah. One of the weird. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that the Vine 7-inch has a black and white photograph that was shot by my current girlfriend.
Huh. Oh, wow.
And she and I basically connected about a year ago, and we had known each other for the past 30 years, but it just seemed incredibly strange that it was this full circle. Like, I didn't really even know her when we said yes to the photograph, because her best friend was Chuck's girlfriend at the time.
Oh,
okay. And I think Chuck was just basically just looking for some sort of image, and he probably showed me that, and I was like, oh yeah, go with that one. Wow. And so
was that
shout out to Colleen Wolpert.
Was that picture like contemporaneous to the time that the 7-inch came out? Because I always thought it was a picture from the early 80s or something. Huh?
No, she's still today a photographer, and was just down in the mall, and that's shot in front of the Kalamazoo building, and of some little girl who knows where she is today. Hopefully she's a fan, so. She's
looking for her money.
Her royalty check.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you get sued like the Nevermind kid.
I had to. I recently bought that Vine 7-inch because mine got all warped somehow, being in storage.
That'll happen.
So that was kind of crazy, man. It's like I'm in the band and I had to buy one on Discogs.
Oh wow. Hell, I've bought multiple copies of records that I was on because, well, it was my fault. I'd meet someone and like, oh, you're my friend, here you go, and then they'd sell it or something.
Yeah.
Oh, I had several occasions where I bumped into somebody and someone would say, oh man, I got the Vine 7-inch in a $1 bin. So I hope they kept it, because I'm sure it's worth at least $25 now.
$23.99.
$23.99.
There you go. Yeah. I don't know. You guys feel good about this, or? And Ian, is it still recording?
Oh yes, it is still recording. Yes, I've been eyeballing it anxiously.
Rich, I got one other shout out that we talked about before. And we weren't actually recording. Mm-hmm. But I love that, I told you that story about seeing Lincoln in a basement party.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and McCourty.
Yeah, and I just remember those two, like, super young scene kids coming in. And, there was kind of a uniform already at that point. And these kids decided they were going to have these, like, full-on trophies hung around their necks.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world at the time. And it turns out those guys. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Christopher Sprague and Saul Wortkin.
Oh, I didn't know that was Chris Sprague. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he, that was the show, I think, that we, formally met those two at.
It was.
It's pretty crazy to think about that. And, yeah, I definitely, even us, being teenagers, we were like, man, those kids, they're crazy.
I know. I loved it so much, though, because they were just we're just going to show up and, fuck up the whole scene with our trophies.
Well, he used to, I don't know that I ever saw this, but he used to, go around the Westnedge Hill area with a framed picture of the president of Hair Club for Men, and he would just, sit it in random places.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, he was, that crew of kids were very unique individuals. And kind of influenced us to get weirder than we were. We were just awkward kids who liked, punk and hardcore, but, those kids definitely, made us fly our freak flag pretty high, so.
That's true.
And just to kind of circle back, I think that's what made Kalamazoo so great, was that it wasn't always three similar bands playing together.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Vine playing with Knee Deep Shag wasn't that unusual, That kind of stuff happened all over town, and it really, Kalamazoo truly was the land of no rules, because, nobody's going to kick you out of the scene because you liked, I don't know, The Damned, and The Damned wasn't cool anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody could kind of do their own thing.
Well, and so that Lincoln show you're speaking of, that was in and of itself a weird bill. This band from Indianapolis called With Authority played, and they were kind of just moshy, kind of New York hardcore type stuff. And then the band that played last sounded like Primus. They were some random band from Lansing that I guess Joel booked on the show. I'm not even sure why he did, but it was, or it might have been because of John Clark, I think, lived at McCordy at that point. He might have gotten them on, and he had a very broad palette in terms of music, so.
Amazing.
I'd like to say hi to Chuck and Tony and Jake if they're listening, which I'm sure they won't be because they've got lives, I guess. But they're certainly a part of the story of Vine. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that was Vine, and you can probably find a MediaFire file with all of their songs on it, or just check YouTube, or maybe at some point there'll be a discography LP, which would be awesome.